Alrighty, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. My name is Nate. I also go by Hockey Boy Nate, and today we're going to be discussing the landfall of Tropical Storm Fred, how that could potentially become a hurricane before it becomes landfall, Tropical Depression Grace, and how that will continue to meander through the Caribbean, as well as newly designated Tropical Depression 8, and whether or not that could be Tropical Storm Henri. So if you guys are new to my channel, please be sure to leave a like on the video, subscribe if you're new, turn on notifications, share this with friends and family and on social media. Also follow me on social media, link will be in the description down below. A disclaimer that I will be live streaming today for the landfall of Tropical Storm Fred. It has been intensifying quite rapidly, and because it most likely will become a high-end tropical storm, low-end category 1 hurricane, I will be covering it for you all live when it does make landfall. So please turn on notifications so that you guys can stay up to date as to when I will be doing that. Let's get right into the video here. 3 things to talk about: Tropical Storm Fred and how it's been intensifying quite rapidly, Tropical Depression Grace as it has been getting closer and closer to Hispaniola, and then Tropical Depression 8 right here. We're going to be heading off to Fred first for the most part, taking a look at the visible satellite imagery here. It's been night for the most part, but as I've been making this video, it has been starting to come out with a little bit more light from the sun here, and you can start to see some of the deep convection that is ongoing here within the center area of low pressure. You can also see these outer bands that are swirling right into the tropical system, a classic feature of how this is continuously organizing more and more every single hour, and how it is intensifying very significantly. As a matter of fact, the National Hurricane Center originally had this at the 8 o'clock Eastern Daylight Time Advisory, 7 o'clock Central Daylight Time Advisory, as a 50-mile-per-hour storm. They have recently put out an update statement 30 minutes later, and it has now been designated as a 60-mile-per-hour storm with a minimum pressure of 993 millibars, moving north at 10 miles per hour. So a lot of intensification is ongoing with this tropical system, and you can even see the general swirl here of the lower level clouds, indicating that there is a low level circulation right about here. The upper level circulation is just a little bit tilted from this, but not too much tilted to the point where this thing cannot continue to intensify, and so shear most likely will not be a factor anymore due to the fact that there is ongoing convection with this storm. Moving off to the water vapor imagery, you can see on a widespread scale here as to what's happening across the board. We have a trough that's moving through here in the United States, creating some form of severe weather over the plains. We do have a little bit of a low pressure system, a very weak low pressure system here in the Gulf of Mexico. We have this very strong ridge here from this high pressure system that's basically been sitting off over the Carolinas, and that was what was creating most of this shear here that is shearing off Fred for the most part. And so you can see how the clouds start right about here and they kind of go down south a bit further. That is the wind shear that I'm talking about, and it's just kind of going off in this general swirl here, this clockwise swirl that eventually goes back into the original area where it was. So that's the reason why Fred is a little bit sheared, but it's still anticipated to intensify rather rapidly. And because of all the thunderstorm activity that is ongoing right now, shear will most likely not be a factor in regards to the intensification of this. But just by looking at this entire system, you can tell that it has this kind of tropical system vibe to it, especially with these feeder bands that are now on the southeastern side of the center area of low pressure. Looking at the radar imagery, you can see exactly that. You can even see the mid-level vortex right here with a bit of an outer band that's starting to develop on the western side. You can even see it trying to develop a band on the eastern side as well, much weaker though. So it's got a little bit of time before we can start calling stuff about eye walls and all sorts of stuff like that. But you do see the feeder bands from the system as well right here and right here. These bands are really what we got to watch out for. Tornado risk. Water spouts are most likely possible, but once these tornadic cells move over land, that's when it starts to become tornadoes. And this general vicinity right here from Apalachicola, Tallahassee, all the way through into the Great Bend of Florida, you guys really need to watch out for the tornado risk as well as the storm surge risk, because this will be causing some consistent damaging winds, pushing the surge and the tide further onshore. Looking at the aircraft reconnaissance, this is the real reason why this has been upgraded over the past 30 minutes from a 50-mile-per-hour storm to a 60-mile-per-hour storm. Looking at some of the data here, you can see how this thing on the surface wind speed from the blue line and how it scatter plots a bit more as a line graph. It has peaked up here towards 45 knots, which would be around 55 miles per hour, give or take, maybe even a little bit higher at 60 miles per hour in some spots. The hurricane hunters only made their first pass here, and they're expected to do more passes into the tropical system. So we're going to be seeing as to how this will continue to intensify closer and closer as this gets to the coast. Going back towards where this thing is officially traveled, you can see the path here and how it originally took off here at the Air Force Base in Biloxi, Mississippi, and how it actually went right through the mid-level vortex right there, even seeing some wind barbs in at flight level, which would be the mid-level parts of the atmosphere, above at or above 50 knots, even up to 60 knots in some spots. So really something interesting that the hurricane hunters are finding with Fred. Looking at the peak storm surge forecast here for you all, from Pensacola Bay all the way over to Apalachicola, 1 to 3 feet of storm surge is expected, but then once you start to get to the Great Bend areas here from Apalachicola and further east, storm surge from 3 to 5 feet is expected with this storm, especially with those outer bands that I was talking about that you could see on radar and satellite imagery. And then even from Seinhatchee River down to Yankeetown, even to Aprika, you can see storm surge amounts from 1 to 4 feet possible. So we really have to watch out for that. And I would highly advise people to stay away from the coast as much as possible here. Taking a look at the rainfall rate for the most part, you can see how there's a lot of these yellows congealed within the panhandle of Florida. That indicates 4 to 6 inches of rain. Some localized areas of orange indicates 6 to 10 inches of rain. So really got to watch out for some localized flash flooding, especially with that storm surge if you're closer towards the coast. So areas near Panama City Beach, areas a bit more, as I said, near Apalachicola, really need to watch out for this as this continues to progress and propagate northward. Even afterwards, you can see how you do have some higher rainfall rates here across the Appalachians, especially areas east of Knoxville and Chattanooga. You have potential rainfall rates that could be in upwards of 6 to 10 inches. Of course, some areas could be a bit higher in localized amounts. Say you have that feeder band that continuously stays over your area. You will obviously have higher amount of precipitation than expected from the Weather Prediction Center here. Taking a look at the greatest flash flood risk here over the next 3 days, you can see that there is a moderate risk that has been issued right over where Fred is basically making landfall, as well as areas here in the Appalachians. So a big thing here is that flash flooding will be an issue. Of course, there will be a tornado risk as well, and there will also be some decent storm surge activity with this. Looking at the timings here from the HWRF model, looking at this current image, this is about 11 o'clock Eastern Daylight Time, 10 Central. As this continues to propagate further north, this will eventually begin to start making landfall at about 5 Central, 6 Eastern Daylight Time. Some of these outer bands don't start to actually hit the coast here, probably until 1 o'clock Eastern or noon Central. So really got to watch out for that. And this is the activity that I was talking about with how these bands could potentially be creating some tornado risks here. All these little bands, as soon as you see them come on shore, really need to watch out for that activity 100%. All right, moving off towards Grace here. Let's actually go back to the full disc here just to see where Grace is. Here's Puerto Rico, here's Hispaniola, here's Cuba, and then right under all of that is poorly organized Grace for the most part. The only issue that I have with some of the activity here is that the National Hurricane Center does have this as a 35-mile-per-hour tropical depression, but hurricane hunters have gone into this thing and have found consistent winds, sustained winds, I should say, in upwards of 40 to even 45 miles per hour. So I think in some areas it could even have sustained winds of tropical storm force, and I would not be surprised if they actually increased the maximum sustained winds as it gets closer and closer towards Hispaniola. But of course, that's what the National Hurricane Center says, and what the National Hurricane Center says is the main thing that goes. So taking a look at the visible satellite imagery here, you can see how this thing continuously has been trying to reorganize itself. It's gotten a lot better defined over the past 2 days. Of course, not the best defined compared to what Fred has done over the past 24 hours, but you have a lot of deep convection here across the board, and that's going to be indicating a lot of your strong damaging winds for the most part. Here's Puerto Rico, here's Hispaniola with the Dominican Republic and Haiti. Unfortunately, Haiti got hit by a magnitude 7 earthquake, and they're going to continue to be impacted by Mother Nature for the most part. And so areas of low infrastructure is most likely going to see some excessive amounts of rain, and flash flooding will most certainly be an issue there. Looking at the water vapor imagery, you can see how this thing does have some very strong shear, some northerly shear that's going to be pushing most of these thunderstorms off to the southern side. And so the mid-level circulation is most likely going to be north of all of this main convection, although there is some big bands of convection that is starting to form right off the coast of the Dominican Republic. And so that's most likely where the mid-level circulation is going to end up developing. And whether or not this thing can avoid most land interaction as it continues to head off towards the north and west is going to be the real key factor in regards to the intensification of this tropical system. But the good news is that it most likely will be heading off just to the south of Cuba and eventually steering off into the direction away from the United States. But the bad news is areas near Jamaica and the Cayman Islands, as well as the Yucatan Peninsula of Mexico, will most likely be impacted by this tropical system and potentially tropical storm as this continues to move on through. But you have some very strong shear here. As I said, you have the ridge impacting Fred. You also have a bit of a troughing action happening just to the north of this. You can see how fast these storms are actually moving off, and it's just really something that we got to watch out for as this continues to progress further westward. Looking at the aircraft reconnaissance missions here from these storms, I'm going to refresh the page here to see if I can get some activity. And here we have what the path has been taken from the NOAA 2 reconnaissance plane here. This is, I believe, Kermit that went in. And you can see how that it has made multiple passes over this band of convection that I was talking about, finding a low-level circulation, well, probably a mid-level circulation right within that storm, and finding some stronger amounts of wind here on the eastern side of the storm. And so we definitely have something that is telling us that we do have some tropical storm force winds. Looking at the plot here of the blue line and how the surface wind has definitely differed over time. This actually has found some wind here in upwards of 45 knots, which would be around 50 miles per hour, almost 55 miles per hour in some spots as well. So really something that we got to watch out for, especially as this thing could try and organize a bit more as it gets closer and closer towards Hispaniola. But the other thing about it is, as I mentioned, land interaction is going to be a big thing. There is some of the tallest mountains here in Hispaniola as well. And so will this thing deteriorate further and further? That is the big question as to what could happen over the next 24 hours. Tropical storm watches have been issued for places of the Dominican Republic and Haiti, as well as Jamaica. So if you guys are within those areas, I highly recommend seeking higher ground. This is expected to continue to stay as a tropical depression as it continues to move on through, and then even as a tropical storm once it gets closer and closer towards the Cayman Islands, eventually heading off towards the Yucatan Peninsula, and then even heading off into the Bay of Campeche, heading off towards the northern portions of Mexico, south of Texas. Although there is a little area here in the cone of uncertainty that could mean that some of the outer bands could be reaching off towards Texas if it really could. Looking at the total precipitation here over the next 3 to 4 days, and the big thing here from the GFS is that there is a lot of rain here indicated. A lot of these browns within this general vicinity that could indicate half a foot of rain, 6 to 8 inches in some of these spots. Some of these purple and magentas in the middle of that actually indicate about a foot of rain too. So some of the localized areas that have very bad infrastructure in Haiti and the Dominican Republic, especially being toppled by that earthquake, will most likely see some flash flooding within some of these areas. And so that's all the more reason why, if you live in these areas, you probably should be seeking higher ground to avoid all of that and potentially protect yourself from other characteristics from this tropical system. even looking at the Euro model, it still says the same exact thing, albeit a little bit lower in some spots right along the border of Haiti and the Dominican Republic. But then even some areas on the western side, the southwestern side of Haiti, you can even see some rainfall rates and upwards of a foot there. So all the more reason with these models, all the more reason why you should be taking this very, very seriously if you live over there. Looking at the 500 millibar geopotential height with the cyclonic vorticity and shaded, and the wind barbs indicating our wind shear here at 200 millibars. And you can see there is Fred off here in Florida. Here is Tropical Depression 8, but the main thing that we're going to want to talk about here is Grace. And Grace is going to eventually be continuing to head off towards the north and west, as it's continuously been being pushed by this flow from the monsoon off of Africa. That's just this continuous easterly flow that's going to continue to push this off. But then now you're going to start to have some shear that's going to be keeping it a little bit in place, with this huge ridge that's going to be pushing a lot of shear, just enacting a lot of northerly shear on this tropical system. And even though this tropical system is going to want to curl off to the north, it has some opposite shear here from the north that's going to basically be keeping it along this general vicinity and moving it off towards the central portions of the Gulf of Mexico. And so you can see as this continues to progress, about Tuesday evening into Wednesday morning, it'll be heading across Jamaica and the Cayman Islands. But then eventually, as it gets over towards open waters, it will start to begin to intensify. And by Thursday morning, it most likely will be a high-end tropical storm to even a Category 1 hurricane as it heads towards the main Yucatan Peninsula, as well as Cozumel, the island of Cozumel. And so really something to watch out for. But you can also see how this ridge is really keeping this in place, with a lot of this shear that is enacting some now not even northerly winds, but now easterly winds, easterly shear that's kind of propagating this a bit further and pushing it along. And so this thing might actually begin to speed up as it gets closer and closer towards land. And then as this continues to move past the Yucatan Peninsula and head out towards the Bay of Campeche, to where it will actually interact with Mexico there a bit later on. Now let's take a look. Final thing here, Tropical Depression Grace. We're going to go, not Grace, geez, Tropical Depression 8 here. And this is right near the island of Bermuda here, for the most part. Very, very well off the coast of the United States, so not a huge impact for them. But if we take a look here at the satellite imagery for Grace, you can see how well defined the circulation actually is, with how these lower level clouds are being swirled right into the low level circulation, and the mid level circulation being right about here. So it's a little bit displaced in regards to the vortex, with the low level vortex being about here. With a lot of this northerly shear that's enacting on it due to that ridge that I was talking about with Fred. And so it's definitely getting a lot more organized. I would not be surprised if this gets turned into Tropical Storm Henri by the end of the day, due to the fact that this thing has continuously been showing more and more organization as it continues to move on through. The big thing here is that the northern side of the tropical system does not have a lot of convection. And so even as this continues to turn a bit more towards the south and east, the island of Bermuda may not get a whole lot of showers and thunderstorms. It definitely will be getting a lot of damaging winds, though, as this continues to propagate into that general vicinity. Taking a look at the water vapor imagery, you can see exactly what I was talking about here with this ridge, and how you have most of these showers and thunderstorms off near the coast of the United States that are pushing down to the south, and even almost south and west. You also have how these clouds here from Tropical Depression 8 moving due south in some spots. So there is definitely a lot of activity that is starting to form off with this. For whatever reason, the satellite imagery keeps buffering a little bit. There we go. We got it officially going about. And so we have a lot of these showers and thunderstorms that are continuously moving off to the south, being sheared off from the main area of circulation. And so whether or not this thing can continuously form a lot of these showers and thunderstorms is going to be the real question here. Taking a look at the cone of uncertainty from the National Hurricane Center, they do believe that it'll be just off of the coast of Bermuda for the most part, and eventually spin back up to the north. Depending upon how strong this is, as this passes through Bermuda, it can determine as to how sharp this turn can be. If it ends up being a little bit stronger, then the system could potentially move a bit further off to the west and then curl up. And depending upon if it's a little bit weaker, this thing could make a lot more of a sharper turn and potentially even impact Bermuda. So that's the reason why there is a tropical storm watch that has been issued for the island of Bermuda over there. Looking at the humidity, the relative humidity from 700 to 400, so basically the mid-level parts of the atmosphere. And you can see how the contours indicate the lower level circulation. And then if you follow along with the kind of curlicue here, that's the mid-level circulation there based off of the humidity. And so you can see how displaced this is from one being right here and then another being right here. And as this continues to progress, that ridge is going to continue to enact a lot of northerly shear, even almost northeasterly shear that's going to displace the circulations for the most part. So here's the mid-level shear right here, or the mid-level circulation. Here's the low-level circulation. And if this thing ends up being a lot stronger, then we could end up seeing the low-level circulation stick around with the mid-level circulation a bit longer. And that's the reason why I was saying that if this thing could continue to strengthen a bit more, it could head a bit further east with that mid-level circulation, and eventually then, after most time, curl off to the north. But even then, it'll most likely lose most of its convection after a excessive period of 3 or 4 days of strong northerly to even northeasterly shear that's going to rip the cell apart before this does eventually head off to the north. So really interesting to see as to how this will continue to progress. You also have a bit of a cold front that'll be pushing on through by the end of the week as well. And so that'll be forcing this tropical system to move off towards the north and east, propagating with the cold front. So really something to really interesting here in the world of tropics as this has been continuing to form on through. That's going to be it for me, guys. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you guys did enjoy it, please be sure to leave a like, subscribe if you are new, turn on notifications because I will be live streaming the landfall of Tropical Storm Fred, potentially Hurricane Fred, as this gets closer and closer towards the panhandle of Florida. Share this with friends and family and on social media. Also follow me on social media. If you haven't already, please be sure to follow my Twitch. I will be live streaming on both YouTube and Twitch. And so if you guys could follow my Twitch as well, that would be greatly appreciated. A spoiler alert is that if you actually put the streams next to each other, my Twitch actually shows my coverage a lot quicker than my YouTube does. So if you want what I'm saying to get out a lot earlier than what it normally is, please go to my Twitch channel and watch from there. That's going to be it. As I said, thank you guys so much for watching. I will catch you guys later on this evening. Peace out.